Thank you very much for those kind words. Chairpersons, Executive Committee member of the IAGES, members of the organizing committee of the midterm IAGES in Bhopal, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It's indeed an honor and a privilege to be standing here before you to deliver this oration named after one of my favorites, Dr. H G Doctor. But what Nidhi just said about me has confirmed one belief that I've had for a long time. And that is, I think I have got in life far more than what I've actually deserved. In terms of affection, in terms of praise, and that coming from a body with which my association goes back almost 20 years. It's like a family. The IAGES does mean something very, very special. Abhay has enumerated all the achievements and the credentials of Dr. H G Doctor, some of which are summarized here. So he was associated with two hospitals, Bhatia Hospital and the Converse Jain Clinic, which was a charitable hospital. He did a lot of work there for the poor. But I saw him for the first time and came in contact with him as a student at the Grand Medical College, when he used to always be taking lectures for us, teaching us, taking bedside clinics. And he has contributed so much in terms of surgical education for the young surgeons and in terms of any new advancement in surgery at the Ethicon Institute in Mumbai, of which he was the founder. His contributions to associations has been innumerable and something that cannot be measured or described in words. He was always a committed teacher. As Abhay said, he contributed to our understanding of suture materials when the suture materials used were quite primitive. He was a devoted family man, a very respected father figure. But at the same time, his role in most organizations was that of a consensus builder. He was always a person who liked to take the team along with him in any endeavor that he felt was worthy of pursuing. An organizer par excellence. Remember so many occasions on which even in the smallest and the most unimportant of meetings where you walked in, Sir was sitting there with a paper in front of him with 8 points written on it to be discussed during that meeting and what was to be achieved at the end of the meeting. So his organizational skills were par excellence. And an astute financial manager. Very few people here will know that the strong financial position that IAGES finds itself today was thanks mainly to his several years of having been the treasurer of it and having laid a solid foundation. But I'm here today to talk about another gentleman that you find in this picture, the beloved Dr. Tehemton Udwadia, who was the founder president of IAGES, and with whom my association goes back to 1986, when for the first time in my final MBBS prelims, he was my examiner. The left is a picture taken sometime during 1990, where we had started doing the laparoscopic cholecystectomies. And the one on the right is where I had assisted him for his last laparoscopic cholecystectomy. One day in March or April 22, he called me and said that, can you come and give me a hand for a laparoscopic cholecystectomy? And I said, absolutely a pleasure, sir. But anything special? He's saying, yeah, from tomorrow onwards, I'm not going to do any more laparoscopic surgeries. But you are there for my first lap chole. I would like you to be there for my last lap chole. And that was a special occasion for me. I met him for the last time on the 1st of December 22. An eminent pediatric surgeon from Mumbai, Dr. Sanjay Oak, who was the dean of KEM Hospital, had translated his autobiography into Marathi with the hope that it should reach many more people, and particularly the lay people. And we had gone to his place to present him with this autobiography. We could see that he was frail. He was sitting in a chair with an oxygen cylinder next to him, and nasal prongs requiring oxygen even to talk, was getting tired very quickly. So we did not take a lot of his time. We wound up our conversation in about 10-15 minutes and left, wishing him well. Knowing in our hearts too well that he was not doing too well in terms of his health. Soon thereafter, we heard that his wife, Khorshid, got admitted to Breach Candy Hospital with a fracture neck femur, required surgery. And in his health condition, he decided proactively to get admitted in a room next to her, saying that if she's in the hospital, let me be also in the hospital. Anyway, my condition probably requires me to be under medical supervision and medical care. Did not hear much about him or from him for the next 2 or 3 weeks. 6th January 2023, I was in Ahmedabad attending the wedding of the daughter of a very dear friend. And that night when I went back to the hotel room around midnight, as is my practice, usually I opened my laptop one last time just to check my email and see if any email required to be responded urgently. And surprisingly enough, there was this email in my mailbox written at 11:28 p.m. Dear Deep, when will you finally get rid of me? I wish to write a short piece on evolution, growth, future of nursing in India. All over India, what progress has been made, future potential, give your thoughts to, please. And almost as if he had some kind of a premonition, the last line is telling, tempus fugit, which means time flies. And later on, when I spoke to his daughter a couple of days later, she told me that he was fast asleep at about 11:20. He suddenly got up and said, Dinaz, just send this email to Deepraj. So he dictated that email. He had not actually written it, but he had dictated it to his daughter, and she had sent this email to me. Perhaps the last email to go out of his mailbox. Because next day at 11 o'clock, still in Ahmedabad, I got a call from Sanjay O that sir had passed away. And obviously it was a big shock, not only to me, but to the whole surgical community in the country. And there were many functions held, remembrance meetings, condolence meetings, each organization of which he was a solid part, held that kind of a meeting. Mark Manuel is an ex-editor of Bombay Times and a very, very close friend of Rushad sir's son. And he wrote this beautiful piece on a Facebook post. I'll not go through the whole thing, but I've just captured one paragraph, which I feel summarized that man so beautifully. So Mark says that I was expecting a state funeral for him with a 21-gun salute, because that would have been in order when a person of his stature was laid to rest. But it would have been much to his embarrassment. For in life, as in practice, Dr. Udwadia was a reticent man, quietly going about his work, always in whites, an energetic spring in his step, even in his 80s, a twinkle in his eye, looking like an Italian film star or even the Pope, but carrying his fame lightly. So he went last evening, without any fuss. So this was a beautiful depiction of the man in his 80s who still believed in working hard and carrying on as if there was no worry, no bother that was troubling him. After the initial phase of grief and sadness weared off, I decided that I had to capture this gentleman's life in the form of an article for the posterity, for people who did not know him that well to read and get inspired. So my dear friend and colleague at Hinduja Hospital, Avinash Katara, and I penned this eulogy and tribute to him, which appeared in the Journal of Minimal Access Surgery. The QR code will take you to that page. But then what could be written in a formal article I felt was not enough. There was a lot more to be said, lot many personal qualities which I admired in him had to be put forward to people for them to emulate him in some way in their lives. And that is the reason I'm ever so grateful to the IAGS and to this conference for giving me this platform to share my thoughts about what was it that I admired in this man, and so did the surgical community in this country. It is well said that one of the best ways to elevate your character is to emulate worthy role models. And if we see Dr. Udwadia, I think the word master surgeon do not do him justice. I'm not talking simply about the breadth of his surgical skills. He was as adept as GI surgery. He was obviously the father of laparoscopic surgery in this country. But every small operation that he did it with such love and with a sense of perfection. So in his autobiography called More Than Just Surgery, there's a chapter which is called Making of a Surgeon. And he describes these 5 qualities that a surgeon should possess to become a good surgeon: honesty, humility, empathy, passion, and leadership. And I cannot think of any other person who embodied these qualities as much as this gentleman did. But that was not all. That was not all about him as a surgeon. There was those small aspects of the surgical practice which somebody who was in close contact with him for so many years got to see, were the ones which were worthy of sharing. I'll just give you a few examples. So this again is something that he writes in his book, that a good stitch in any part of the body should have these 4 characteristics. It should be equal distance from both sides of the cut, should be taken at equal depth from both sides, it should be at right angles to the cut surface, and should merely approximate tissues and not strangle them. In other words, a surgeon has to be a pathological perfectionist. These were his words. I'll give you another example. I returned to Mumbai in 1997, having worked in the UK for 5 years, and a physician whom I knew beforehand admitted a patient with a breast abscess to this hospital, Kambala Hill Hospital, and said, could you please go and take care of this lady, drain that abscess. So I did. This was my first surgery upon return from UK in Mumbai. It was a breast abscess. And a couple of weeks later when I met Sir, he said, oh wow, Deepraj, I saw your name on the list. You are doing some surgery. And I told him, sir, but it was just a breast abscess. So he said something to me which has stayed with me all these years. He said, remember, what helps you build a solid reputation in the early days of your practice is drainage of abscesses and removal of sebaceous cysts. It's never the big surgeries, it's never the cholecystectomies, the Whipples, or the bowel dissections. Please remember that. And carrying on to the same theme, he was once sitting in the surgeon's room at Hinduja Hospital, and another surgeon who shall remain unnamed walked by, and sir asked him, so what are you doing today? So he's saying, oh, I'm just knocking off a gallbladder. And that made him visibly upset. Many of you may have heard him recount this incident in his talks. He said, how can he say that he's knocking off a gallbladder? Does he not understand that this is serious business? Surgery is serious business. He cannot say he's knocking off a gallbladder, because I truly believe that there are no minor surgeries, there are only minor surgeons. Those who consider surgery so callously are minor surgeons, and they should probably not be performing surgeries. Going beyond him as a surgeon was a man with extraordinary levels of empathy for his patients and a constant vigil on the patient comfort. I'll just give you a few examples here. So whenever a patient was being induced, so this was his green cap and the green mask, by the way, which was autoclaved and kept in a packet. He never wore a paper cap or a paper mask. So he used to be in the OT holding the patient's hand with his mask down and saying a few nice things to comfort the patient. And when we asked him what was the reason for that, this was his explanation. Surgeon is likely the only person the patient really recognizes and knows in the OT. So when he's undergoing anesthesia, he has to see the surgeon's face, because the other people around him may appear scary. He may not know them well enough. This was something I heard him when I had gone once to assist him in a small case in a private hospital. This was just a mole on the cheek in a pretty young lady that he was removing under anesthesia. And even when he was injecting local, I heard him say something that again has stayed with me, and that was so telling of his concern for the patient. And he would say this every time he injected local anesthesia into somebody and give them that first needle prick. Please forgive me. I'm going to give you a small injection and that will hurt a little bit, but then the rest of the surgery will be comfortable. Who says, please forgive me to a patient when you're injecting a local anesthetic into a patient? But that was the level of empathy this person had. And although his patients ranged from industrialists to politicians to the rich and famous, he demonstrated that same level for the poorest of the poor. Those who have heard him often enough must have heard the story of that he used to narrate in his talk towards the end of King Charles and Paré, the famous French surgeon. That once Paré, the famous French surgeon, had kept King Charles waiting in his waiting room, and the king was annoyed and asked him, how can you make me wait? So Paré said, but I was with another patient. He said, do you not know who I am? I am your king. You can't keep me waiting. And to which Paré responded, but I cannot do that. The king said, why not? And Paré said, that's because I treat all my patients like kings and queens. So I can not treat you any differently. And I actually got to see an example of this when, as a resident, I remember I had gone to his clinic in Cook building, and it was about 10 o'clock at night. And he had gone through a long day. The secretary was winding up. And suddenly she came inside and said that little chanawala who sells chanas downstairs has come with some reports that you had asked him to bring of his wife. And shall I send him or shall I ask him to come tomorrow? So at 10 o'clock at night, at the end of the day, he said, no, please send him. His time is more important. He has to go tomorrow back to his work. So he sat with that chap patiently, went through all his reports and said something to him, which the bhaiya felt very nice about. Bhaiya, तुम्हारे बीबी को मामूली बीमारी है, वो ठीक हो जाएगी, बिल्कुल चिंता मत करो. So this was at 10 o'clock at night for a patient who was not going to pay him in cash or in kind. And that was the level of empathy that he showed. His writing, editorial and oratory skills are legendary. We all have been witness to that. And it is easy to assume that it came to him absolutely naturally, that he was a born writer, born orator. If you read his autobiography, he gives credit to a lot of his writing and his excellent command over the language to his mother, who made him read a lot. So he has written 2 surgical books. I'll come to the other 2 books that he wrote, but these are the 2 surgical books which he wrote. He was the editor of the Indian Journal of Surgery from 2001 to 3 and of JMAS from 2005 to 17. And this is where most of the magic happened. His personal study at home, you'll see the bookshelf on the right side with all sorts of books, surgical and non-surgical. He just loved to read a lot. So what is assumed as natural or gifted happened in this room. And more than that, it was the dinner table at which he sat down, papers. He used to love these yellow lined pads for some reason. And although he used computers, whenever he wrote something, it was always handwritten, which could be deciphered by only 1 or 2 of his secretaries what he has written. Then they used to send him the printouts. He used to make correction on the printouts and used to go back again for corrections. So that's the way he functioned. Even during the COVID times when most of us were sitting at home, he actually managed to write and publish 2 of these articles which he had been wanting to do for a long time. We all have heard him speak and have always been enthralled by his speeches. This was him delivering the founder president, Dr. H G Doctor Oration at the HSI-Con in 2018. And again, this was not something that came to him naturally. He always said that he had to put in efforts, and particularly before an important talk, an oration or something that had to make an impact, he would get up in the morning, would make madam, his wife, sit there, and he would practice. So he always said that although it appears to come naturally, I have to put in a lot of efforts behind the screen. I have to practice, practice, and practice. And the other tip that I have shared with some of the youngsters here, he used to say that I always, when I'm on the podium, have one small card in front of me with one word written on it, and that is slow. I keep reminding myself that I have to slow my pace down for the people before me to understand me and appreciate what I'm saying. His impact as a teacher, again, is legendary. So this quote does him justice, that he was truly a teacher who inspired many, and many of his students, including Dr. Ramesh Punjani, Abhay, those of us who were fortunate enough to be close to him are sitting here in this audience. And his teaching was not necessarily classroom teaching. He could just pull up some chairs and sit with the students in the cafeteria of CMAS, the training center in Mumbai, and engage with them for hours together, discussing their issues, solving their queries, or in a more formal setting. He had an immense love for his residents and the people who actually worked with him on a regular basis and worked with him for a period of time. On 31st May 2015, Abhay and I had taken the initiative to organize a felicitation for him for the 25th year of the first laparoscopic cholecystectomy in India. And this is a photograph taken of all the fellows who had gone through the department at Hinduja at that time, of whom he was extremely proud. One particular person stands out though, and that is this gentleman, Mr. Krish Menon, who is a liver transplant and HPV surgeon in London. And when he heard that we were organizing this program, he mailed me and said, Deepraj, I would like to come for this program. I have been Surge Registrar at Breach Candy Hospital many years ago. And I was a little surprised. I said, Krish, you are in London, and this is literally going to be a half-day program from 9 a.m. to about 1 p.m. Are you sure you want to travel all the way from London? He's saying, I would not miss this for the world. And he came down and presented Sir with a beautiful, this is one of the earliest laparoscopic trocars which he had got mounted in a beautiful wooden frame with an inscription on a gold plate below it. And he presented that to Sir. I didn't know Krish all that well at that point in time, but we had an opportunity to have dinner that night before he took his flight. And I asked him, I said, Krish, what made you come down all the way from London to Mumbai just for 24 hours? And he narrated stories after stories of how, when he was working with Sir at Breach Candy, he had helped him, guided him, had fixed him up for a job in the UK, the first break that he got in the UK. So he's saying, I would not have missed this for the world. I had to come down. If Sir was being felicitated, I had to be there. This is another example. A complex case which Dr. Ramesh Punjani, who was Sir's student, one of his pet students and registrars, was doing at Breach Candy Hospital. He had asked me and Dr. Imran Sheikh, who is a fantastic GI and HPB oncosurgeon, to give him a hand because this was a complex case. And 3 of us operated. Long surgery, went on for about 4.5 hours. At the end of it, we were all exhausted. And Sir, who was operating in the next door theater, had dropped in to see what was going on. And he wrote an email to the three of us the next day, which I cherish as much as any other memory with him. He wrote, "Dear Ramesh, dear Deepraj, dear Imran, it was such a joy to see the surgery last week for several reasons. To see good surgery with gentle tissue handling, precision and respect for tissue is always a great joy, as is appropriate decision making as the surgery progresses. To me, to see my resident, and what is more important, my resident's resident, that is Imran. Imran was Ramesh's resident at one point in time during his training. Do better surgery than I ever could is always a great joy. What gave me even greater joy was to see the concern and friendship with which all three operated. No casual observer would have been able to tell whose patient the three of you were operating upon. In an age where we see surgeons and stab their colleagues in the back, in a dog-eat-dog world, it was such a joy to see you three perform in the best interest of the patient." And this was not just a platitude. This was not just to make us feel nice. He never did that. He actually meant every word that he had put down in this email. So that was the character of the man. He always believed that if you had to praise somebody, it had to be in public. And if you had to correct or criticize somebody, it had to be behind closed doors. So in my 3 years first as a houseman and then as a registrar with him in JJ Hospital, the only scolding that I received from him was at the end of a rounds, because there was some problem with a patient which we had not picked up on time. But it was after all the housemen, all the interns, the students were asked to leave the room and the doors of the room were locked. The two registrars were made to stand in front of him, and we got a little bashing up for about 10 minutes, but it was all forgotten the next day. So that was the quality of the man for which people admired him. There was another quality in him, that he could handle failure in a way that not many people can. And this quotation comes to mind, that your attitude towards failure always determines your altitude after failure. And in his autobiography, he narrates 2 of his failures. So he was open to admitting failures in life and sharing them with others. So the first one was, you would feel that a surgeon of his stature would not like to talk about how he had done badly in his MS examination in 1960. But he shared this story at every possible opportunity when he felt that it could teach a lesson to the younger surgeons. So he had a short case with a patient with florid lymphadenopathy in the neck, and the examiner, Professor Santokh Singh Anand from Punjab, I think he was from Ludhiana or Amritsar, I forget which, asked him, "Okay, boy, so what's your diagnosis?" And Dr. Udwadia replied, "Sir, I think it's tuberculous lymphadenopathy." So he's saying, "Have you palpated the patient's spleen?" The patient was sitting on a stool. So he's saying, "Sorry, sir, I have not palpated the patient's spleen." F. He's saying, if you are appearing for an MS examination and a patient with a lymphadenopathy, you do not palpate the spleen, you have no business to go out and practice as a surgeon. You failed, come back again 6 months later. So he shared this story also because something that this examiner said to him stuck with him for a long time. Professor Anand told Dr. Udwadia that at least you should feel happy that you've been failed by a Hunterian lecturer of the Royal College of Surgeons of England. And Dr. Udwadia writes in his autobiography, I did not know at that time what that even meant. But later on, as I became a surgeon, I went to the UK, I realized that this was a great honor bestowed upon only a few by the RCS England. And surely enough, in 1984, he was invited as a Hunterian lecturer to give a talk on his work on peritonioscopy. Laparoscopy back then was called peritonioscopy. And in a couple of years' time, he published that as an article in the Annals of Royal College of Surgeons of England. The other failure that he is very fond of talking about is upon his return from UK, he worked as a PhD student with his mentor, Professor P.K. Sen. And they had an animal lab there, and he was doing some research on myocardial revascularization, replicating the reptilian myocardial circulation as a model. And when this thesis was submitted to the Mumbai University, two things happened. That thesis was rejected, and Dr. Udwadia was failed. And more importantly, Dr. P.K. Sen, who incidentally was the first person to do a heart transplant in India and the second or third in the world, was removed by Mumbai University as a PhD teacher, saying that you are encouraging students to do ridiculous form of research which has no relevance in the practical world. Sure enough, a few years later, this research was actually published in a well-known scientific journal. And today, if you read about this, this is a chapter on the history of transmyocardial revascularization. That early research from 1965, Sen et al., is actually mentioned as one of the pioneering steps towards developing this form of revascularization. And he writes in this essay which he wrote in a book which was published by ASI many years back. It's called The Power of Failure. So he says, I realized that failure, like hardship, was the best way of tempering the steel in one's soul. It gave me the wisdom and the softness to accept failures in others with sympathy and understanding. Most of all, these failures prepared me for my entire career as a surgeon, because he believed that every anastomosis that failed, every wound that got infected, every surgical problem that a patient had after the surgery was in fact a failure, and the surgeon had to take the full responsibility for it. It is said that courage isn't having the strength to go on, but in fact it is going on when you don't have any strength left. And this has been embodied in this incident which I'm going to narrate. So in 2016, he received an email from what was called the Einstein Foundation. And they had decided to celebrate the 100th year of Einstein's discovery of theory of relativity. And they had chosen 100 great minds from around the world, from 10 disciplines, to send them each an essay which was to be published in this 3D printed book, which has the face of Einstein. And that book was to be published in zero gravity on the International Space Station. And also those 100 visionaries were invited to Montreal for a summit for 2 days, and each of them was given 5 minutes to say something about their experiences. But destiny had something different in mind. Early 2017, when he was traveling to UK at his son's place, he felt that there was something odd. He palpated a lump in his abdomen, rushed back to Mumbai. Investigations were done. That was diagnosed to be retroperitoneal sarcoma. Underwent a prolonged surgery which required IVC resection, prolonged ventilation, ileus that went on for almost 2 weeks. So by the time he got discharged at the end of 3 weeks, he was very, very frail, had a very weak voice because of the prolonged intubation. And that summit in Montreal seemed like the last thing on anybody's mind. We all wanted him to get better and stronger. The summit was only about 6 or 7 weeks away. And everybody tried to convince him that, sir, I think just let it go. It's not a good idea for you to travel for such a distance. But obviously, the gentleman had something different in mind. He called a speech therapist home, worked with that speech therapy and a physiotherapist continuously for 6 weeks, and finally delivered that lecture at this Genius 100 Innovation Summit on the 8th of September 2017. But that was not all. That was not all what made him who he was. He had a tremendous sense of humor, and in fact, if I may call it, even a mischievous streak in him. And we were all witness to that. I'll just narrate 2 small examples. This was the JJ Ward 19A 1990, which Ramesh will remember. I don't know if that houseman sitting there, in fact, is Ramesh. But we had finished a busy ward round in this ward, and we had gone down to the female ward. As a registrar, I was presenting the cases to him, and I told him, I said, so this patient had her thyroidectomy 6 days ago. We used to keep the patients in the hospital till suture removal. They didn't go home a day or 2 later. And she's about to get discharged. And we had a lecturer, 2 registrars, 2 housemen, 1 intern and 10 students. So it was like a big group near that patient. So suddenly he took his eyes away from the patient and looked at the students and asked this question. So what is a Paget's test? So, I mean, not many people understood, but one smart boy from the group put his hand up and said, sir, Paget's test is carried out when you have a small swelling which cannot be fluctuated in the conventional way. You put 2 fingers on the side and press in the center, and if you feel those 2 fingers separating, then it confirms that that swelling has some fluid or it's a cystic swelling. I had still not caught on to what was going on, but when I looked at that patient's neck, I realized that the patient did have a small collection in the center of that thyroidectomy scar. So he next turns to me and says, whispers almost, you will aspirate that before she goes home, won't you? Please take care of that. So I said, yes. So he had made a point without belittling me in any way, and at the same time in a very humorous way, something that has stayed on with me. Another example of our room at Hinduja Hospital, when we got this brand new room with new furniture about 15, 16 years back, I promptly went home, collected all the mementos which I had received from conferences and showed them off in the cabinet, on the wall, above the ledge, everywhere, feeling quite happy with myself. Next day when the boss walks into the room, he asks only one question. Am I permitted to keep at least one memento in this room? And I said, of course, so you are the boss, this room belongs to you, so you can keep whatever you want. So he's saying, no, no, only one. And the day after I saw this little picture in one corner, and this was him receiving Padma Shri at the hands of Professor Abdul Kalam. And I said, sir, this is absolutely not fair. You cannot bring this picture in the room. It just overshadows all those 25 mementos from various conferences that I've kept in. He didn't reply to that. He just smiled mischievously and winked at me. I got the message. From that day forward, I stopped putting any additional mementos in that room. And finally, a chapter in his life which was not very pleasant, which would have been hard for anybody to endure. This gentleman endured it with great courage. So 31st May 2022, 31st May is a day on which he had done the first lab chole. So this was at Breach Candy Hospital. The other gentleman here is Professor Praful Desai, PB Desai, the renowned oncosurgeon, his classmate and a very dear friend. So there was some cake organized in the operation theatre, and this is Dr. Desai feeding him a piece of cake. A happy occasion, we all enjoyed it. And soon enough, in about 15-20 days' time, he had to be admitted to the hospital with respiratory failure, because by then it was noticed that he had bilateral florid lung mets from the sarcoma for which he was operated in 2017. And in the second book, which came out just last month, called One Way to Live, he writes that as I lay alone in the semi-dark ICU with oxygen tubes in my nostrils, I made my decision. I would not lie down, a hapless captive to cancer. I would face it on my own terms. I would continue my weekly clinic. I would maintain one operation slot a week at the hospital and continue to play golf, which he indeed did. This is a picture which you probably have seen before, which had done rounds of social media, with him at the golf course sometime in November 22, just about 2 months before he passed away. A BiPAP mask on his face, somebody carrying that machine, and he continued to play golf. The only complaint he had was, Deepraj, I cannot walk from one hole to the other. I have to go in the buggy. But I still, once I reach that hole, I complete my shots and then come home. So this is a lesson that we must learn from the epilogue of his second book, One Way to Live, which, by the way, he dictated it when he was in the hospital during those final days in December 2022. With time to contemplate over the years, I do feel a well-lived life is a good preparation for our inevitable exit. A life where the pursuit of joy, the permanence of friendship, and the acceptance of any success as a gift from above and counting our blessings are far more important than counting our acquisitions. So these are indeed golden words that we should all remember. During the COVID times, with a lot of time on hand to explore different books, I started reading something about the philosophy of Stoicism. And this is a philosophy I would strongly commend that all of you read about Stoicism. So this is a philosophy which has been followed by many ancient greats, including Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and volumes have been written upon it. And there are several examples of people who followed these Stoic principles and what are called as the 4 cardinal virtues of the Stoics, the way they lead their life. And the guiding principles or these cardinal principles are wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. I'll tell you what, I never gave a thought to this till I started working on this presentation. And as I captured some of his qualities in the presentation, I started thinking to myself, was there in fact a stoic living amongst us, hiding in plain sight, and we fail to recognize him as such? Because there is no other person that I know who embodied these qualities as much as Dr. Udwadia did. And finally, I always believe that reading of good books is like a conversation with the finest minds. And if you believe in that, I would commend to you these 2 books. First is his autobiography, More Than Just Surgery. And the second one is a book called One Way to Live, which is more recent, published. Both of them are available on Amazon. The first one talks more about his life as a surgeon, and the other one is a very personal, intimate look at his life and the several philosophies that he followed. So I would strongly recommend that you pick up these books and enrich your experience and in your life with this. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the courtesy of your time and your attention.